Welcome to the Tanyaacker Show. Age, power, and opportunity. These are just some of the topics that I discuss with my next guest, Amanda Litman. Amanda is the president and co-founder of Run for Something, a nonprofit that helps young people prepare for and run for office. And her latest book is When We're in Charge, the Next Generation's Guide to Leadership. She is taking on the gerontocracy. You'll find out what that means. So from this Gen Xer to the rest of you, regardless of whatever generation you fall in, here I am with Amanda Litman. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Thank you for being here. Amanda Litman, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Well, I'm excited to have this conversation with you, but right off the bat, I have to ask you, and I ask you this as a very proud Gen Xer. I think my generation knows it all, and including the fact that we don't know it all. But what is the gerontocracy?
Such a good question. So the gerontocracy is government, really any system of power, but usually government run for and by old people. It is what we have in the United States at this moment, where the average age in Congress in the House is about 58, 59, and the Senate is 63, 64. Trump is our probably last boomer president, hopefully. And it's a government that really privileges older people in basically every possible way. That has left young people left out of rooms where decisions are made, and also on the shitty end of the stick when it comes to policymaking.
Let me push back on that a little bit. In every other discipline, experience matters a lot. So, for instance, if you're a client and you want to hire a lawyer, you want a lawyer who's been trying these sorts of cases for 20 years, not 2. If you are a patient and you need to have a surgery, you want a surgeon who's done 200 of these surgeries, not 10. So why is politics different?
You know, politics is different in part because we have these governing bodies where you're trying to get diverse teams of people into these spaces. Right now, I'm not saying that every member of Congress should be a 20 or 30 something, but we should have a few more, just a few, as part of these conversations, because we are getting legislative outcomes and legislative processes that are not reflecting the best and most meaningful deliverables that young people need. And I reject the premise that young definitively means unexperienced. What Run for Something does, which I'm sure we will get into, is help young people run for these local offices, these things like school board, city council, state legislature, where you get the kind of governing experience you need to be effective in higher office. The problem, basically, up until we started Run for Something, was that nobody considered 20 or 30 somethings as viable candidates for these positions. So you would get 50 and 60-year-olds running for city council and school board, and then you would get 60 and 70-year-olds running for Congress, which left whole generations out of the rooms where these decisions were being made.
How old do you have to be in the gerontocracy? I'm trying to figure out if I've hit it yet.
How old are you?
54.
54. You're still young when it comes to Congress.
Phew!
Which is like that's the broken part.
I feel young.
We don't. When we're talking about young people, and especially in politics, I'm not talking about like teenagers. In most circumstances, if you're under the age of 60, you're the young whippersnapper in the room in these political environments, which is insane. That's an insane thing to be true.
I think that your response was entirely on point, because the assumptions that we make about what experience is and what experience matters is actually, I think, critical to kind of understanding a lot of what you're doing and why it's necessary to bring in new blood. I mean, listen, I've watched, as I'm sure you have, congressional hearings, right, where, you know, you've got Congress people who are trying to interrogate folks about technology or platforms, and it's clear they don't know what the heck they're talking about. Like, they have no, it's very, very clear. So, you know, talk a little bit about some of the ways, especially now, like in this world that is being increasingly governed by tech. Talk about how young people really have a really special value add in this moment. Talk a little bit about that.
And I think it's technology is one really good use case where, you ask, which I've done, many older elected officials, very prominent ones too, like, tell me what your social media algorithm is like. Like, what side of TikTok are you on? What reels do you see? Like, are you in subreddits? There's actually not a right answer necessarily, but they fundamentally don't understand the question. So like, what's a For You page? What do you mean? What's a reel? Like, I don't understand the question. It is so disconnected from how people get information these days, which when you think about how hard it has been for so many of these politicians to communicate what they want to the people they need to reach, you can't be a producer if you're not at least a little bit a consumer. You have to understand the language that exists on these platforms. You also have to understand the way that they're boiling our brains in order to regulate them so that doesn't happen. We have seen that the younger elected officials who have come up as computer software engineers, as tech producers, as social media content creators, better understand how to regulate them. The other issue among many where this really becomes a big deal is housing. When you think about housing in your experience, you said you're 58, is that right? 54?
54.
I did not mean 54.
Don't age me.
You don't look a day over 53. When you think about your experience in the housing market versus I'm 35, my experience in the housing market versus that of a 24-year-old who just graduated and is entering probably as a renter, it is totally different. The average age of first-time homebuyers keeps climbing. Young people are disproportionately renters, especially young people of color, especially younger working class people. The idea of buying a home feels so out of reach for so many young people right now. And the elected leaders, of whom 93% are homeowners, do not govern that way. They do not understand what it's like right now to try and rent an apartment, basically anywhere in the country, city, suburban, rural, anywhere. They don't understand what it's like to buy a home for the first time. That means that they are not governing in a way that serves young people. That it's not a personal failing of these older leaders. They just don't get it.
I just had this conversation with two law school classmates of mine. I came out of law school in the mid-90s, in 1995, and the world was just different. The economy was different. The economy was better. There was an assumption that you were going to do better than your parents. There was an assumption that when you found a job and set down stakes, you were going to buy a home and have some stake in the world. And it is jarring when you listen to how, and when we, I think, hear how disaffected younger people are. Like, as you said, home ownership is out of reach. They are not seeing the value of their educational investments. Or they're not realizing the value, getting any tangible value or getting enough tangible value, at least with really in comparison to the investment that they made. So how do you start to fix that when so many of the problems really, they're just big, like how do you fix an economy? How do you have young people feel a little more connected to it? Tell us how to start.
So I think there's many possible solutions here. The one that I have chosen to dedicate my time to is getting young people into elected office so they can be the decision makers. So I run an organization called Run for Something. We help young people, mostly folks 40 and under, although there's certainly people outside that age range who come to us, run for local office for the very first time. We focus exclusively on things like school board, city council, state legislature, library board, community college boards, the more than 500,000 elected offices that really make up the building blocks of democracy. And we help people who never saw themselves as politicians become public servants. So from signing up to run, which more than 225,000 people have done with us over the last 8 years, including more than 60,000 just since the November election, raise their hands to say they want to run, go through the experience of learning how to do it. We've helped thousands actually get on the ballot. And we've Run for Something specifically has helped elect more than 1,500 millennials and Gen Z across 49 states plus DC, mostly women, mostly people of color, and about a quarter LGBTQ plus leaders who have actually done shit once they've been elected. They've lowered the cost of insulin. They've passed free lunches for kids in schools. They've passed Medicaid expansion. They've stopped abortion bans. They've protected trans kids. They've ended single family zoning. They've gotten police out of traffic enforcement. Like, they've done the kind of thing that so many people like to talk about. These elected leaders have done it, and then they've communicated about it in a way that actually breaks through to people. because they know how to use the internet. They know how to use social media. They've been on Instagram or Facebook or whatever since they were teenagers, whatever the appropriate social media platform is. They get it and they live it and then they lead like it. And it is transformative for bringing young people into the process and seeing like, oh, actually good things can happen. Like it's a better way is possible. I think that's really exciting.
Again, sort of circling back to your point about experience, you're talking about a demographic that's actually living these issues. They are raising young people. They are engaging with the system in a way that, maybe in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you don't engage with it in the same way. You don't have young kids who might need a school lunch and need help eating at school. Like you don't. So I think that that's really important. You work primarily, I think, if not exclusively, Stand for Something works to elect young progressive leaders. You yourself worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign. You worked for President Obama. How do you explain the real strength that Donald Trump showed in the last election with the young electorate? The first time he ran and was sworn in, he was already the oldest president. At the time, he was the oldest president to be sworn in. Now, certainly is not a young man, and he's shown tremendous strength with younger voters. What do you make of that?
Change and frustration with the system that wasn't working for young people, I think, is the far and away biggest reason. And I will add, young people experience inflation at higher rates than older folks because of the way that we, again, primarily through rent, but also cost of living, childcare, all of that, young people experience inflation much higher. I think the biggest thing about Trump is that he promised to burn down a thing that wasn't working for young people. And both Biden, for sure, promised stability, and then Kamala, to a certain extent, promised stability and more of the same, and didn't have the time necessarily to plot out a different vision forward, to plot out change. That made it really, really hard. What I do think is telling, though, is that we've already seen, 6 months into his presidency, his approval ratings with young people are in the toilet. They may have liked him in comparison to Biden or to Harris, but they do not like him as president. They are not dyed-in-the-wool Trump people. They are also not dyed-in-the-wool Democrats. That's an opportunity for us as a party. But these are not folks who want what he is delivering right now. They definitely don't like the way he is delivering it. I think that is, for me, the space that we should be looking to plotting forward.
When a constituency of people is really unhappy with the institutions, it's attractive to want to just burn it all down. And that is happening. That is happening before our very eyes. So what are some of the specific opportunities that you see to rebuild? Because I read your great interview in Vanity Fair where you talk about this. You say that when something is burned down, there's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity to rebuild. So what does the rebuilding look like to you?
We'll see where things fall when all this is over, like what is still standing of these institutions that he has so thoroughly burnt to the ground. But I think that's the task for the Democratic Party right now, is to plot out a vision for what does it mean if Trump's destroying foreign aid? What does a new foreign aid program look like? We can agree that it's important. What does it look like? If what it was wasn't working, what could it be? What should the Department of Education do? How can it better serve, especially kids with disabilities, rural schools? What should it be doing? If he's destroyed, say, the Department of State, and basically most of our diplomacy program, okay, we get a chance to rebuild it. As he continues to destroy these things, I don't want to undermine the harm that he has done. Both real and practical, dangerous people are going to die or experience serious suffering because of what he has done. And Democrats get to be the party that says, you know what, you're right. Those institutions weren't working. Let's do it differently. And our task for the next 3 years is to really put our best possible thoughts on what that could look like. And then the task after that, once we've got power again, is to actually do it and not feel reliant on that the way things were done yesterday has to be the way they happen tomorrow. I think that's so hard for older Democratic leaders who helped build these institutions in the first place. They feel like it was their projects,
I think in any area, sometimes you have to admit, sometimes the thing, it worked for a while and maybe it's not working anymore. And even if it is working, you have to do a better job of explaining to people why it's relevant. There are opportunities there to be sure. So your organization, Run for Something. And by the way, how old were you when you founded Run for Something?
26, a few weeks shy of 27.
So tell me, you're 26. You are a veteran at that time of political campaigns. And I think that this is something that a lot of people would like to hear. Like, you saw a problem and you went to fix it. Tell me what you did. How did you start this organization in very practical terms?
So, as you mentioned, I worked for Secretary Clinton's presidential campaign for 2 years. I was her email director, managing online fundraising. If you ever got emails from our team, that was me and the people that worked with me. About a week after Election Day, I started hearing from people I'd gone to high school and college with. Hey, Amanda, I'm a public school teacher in Chicago. I'm thinking about running for office. You're the only person I know that works in politics. What do I do? And I didn't have an answer for them. Because at the time, if you were young, like mid-20s, and you wanted to do more than vote and more than volunteer, there was nowhere you could go that would answer your call. That seemed to me like a problem that we could solve. And I was sad and unemployed and a workaholic. So I reached out to a whole bunch of people with an idea. What if we created an organization that could be the on-ramp for these people who want to run? One of those folks became my co-founder, an operative named Ross Morales-Rochetto, who had been working campaigns for about 15 years. Ross and I wrote a plan, we built a website, and then we launched Run for Something on Trump's first inauguration day. We thought, what a fun hobby this will be. It'll be a side project while we get real jobs. We'll get 100 people who want to run in the first year. Cool. We had 1,000 people sign up in the first week. 8.5 years later, and 1,500 people, more than that, help elected across the country. It is very much not a side project. It is a full-time, multi-million-dollar, many-staffed organization that I think has done some real good and pushed forward a conversation about what it means to be a leader, which, if nothing else, and there's been a lot else, but if nothing else, I think that is transformative for our democracy.
I hope it's not ageist for me to say this. It's always weird when someone says, I'm proud of you when they had nothing to do with what you did. But as somebody who's got a couple of decades on you, I'm proud of you. I think that that sort of initiative and leadership is something that's missing across many generations, frankly. I think that it's easy for people to talk about problems. It's sometimes less common for them to actually come up with and create focused solutions. The other thing that I really kind of enjoyed your digging into in the interview that I read was your conversation about authenticity. Let me throw this out there. I sometimes think there's too much authenticity. I think that we are in a no filter environment, and I don't think that's always good. I think that sometimes it is not a bad thing to show up in a room and try to be your best self. Everybody doesn't need to know your feelings. Everybody doesn't need to know how you feel about every single thing at every particular moment. Sometimes manners matter. Describe what does authenticity mean to you? And how should it be better employed or how do you think it should be employed in public spaces?
I love this question. So this was a huge theme of the book that I just published, When We're in Charge, which is all about next generation leadership. Because I think you're right, especially Gen Z, but millennials too, to a certain extent, sort of have a misunderstanding that authenticity means bringing your full self to spaces when that's not the case. Not every space is the right place for your full self. Your real self maybe, but not your full self, and there's a distinction. So I have what I call a theory of responsible authenticity, especially as a leader. Your job is to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. You set the tone, you set the mood, you model the behavior you want to see. In order to do that, you have to be a little careful. You have to be self-regulated. You have to be intentional with how you present yourself. That doesn't mean don't be yourself. And this is something people will often push back on me. They're you're being calculated, you're saying be manipulative, you're saying fake it. Saying no. When you think about what authenticity looks like, you're often thinking about athletes or influencers or people you're seeing online. People forget they are performing a version of themselves. I think a lot about the influencers who do day in my life, video vlogging. Let me show you what I'm doing today. It's they got out of bed 20 minutes ago to set up the camera and brush their hair. They're not showing you their real self. It's real, but it's performative. That doesn't mean it's not. It doesn't mean it's fake. It just means it's performed. When you are as a leader, whether a politician, a teacher, a parent, a person in charge of any space, you have to show up as a version that not that you want to be, but that your team needs you to be. And there's a difference. And those that forget that often self-sabotage.
That is so beautifully said. And there's another thing that I believe you talk about in the book. What's a bad boomer boss?
Okay, so can I tell you the possible example? My dad read the book and he was like, Amanda, I think you were talking about me. And I'm like, I'm not. You name it, but I'm not. The best example of the worst possible iteration of the bad boomer boss is Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo, who micromanages, is in it for himself, not the work, wants the power, sexually harasses people, hostile work environment, yells, makes his problems everyone's problems, does not seem to have clear goals beyond his own sort of vanity. That is the worst possible iteration of the bad boomer boss. The sort of mid-tier version of the bad boomer boss is like the guy who shows up at work every day and sort of like doesn't understand how to use the technology that you're using and doesn't have clear goals and sort of veers between oversharing all of his problems and also like beep bop robot boss, things like mental health is a joke, thinks you're complaining when you ask for more clarity, like doesn't understand that the role of the workplace in our lives has changed very quickly in the last 5 or 10 years. And that what people want and need out of their leaders has shifted. And it is not up to the moment that we're in.
You gave an example of the best example of the bad boomer boss. What's the best example of their opposite? Or who's the best example of their opposite?
It's so funny. I actually, to give a really clear, distinction here, I actually think Zohran Mamdani is a very good example of a next generation leader. The 33-year-old who just won the mayoral primary here in New York, who very clear about what he believes, uncompromising about what he believes, but open to new information, really clear-eyed about who he's in it for. He shows up for his team, not himself. You'll notice, we actually don't know that much about him personally. I mean, we do. We know what he believes in his policy positions, and he is authentic, he is communicative, he is joyful, but there are very clear boundaries about how much of him he is giving to this. We don't know that much about his marriage or his personal life. We don't know that much about him outside of the role that he is performing as candidate for mayor. He is clearly very focused on what he is trying to deliver. It's affordability. That is the end goal. And people know what that looks like and what that means for them. And he knows how to use the modern communication tools to get that out. That is really powerful in this moment because communication and selling yourself as a leader, whether you're a politician or a boss or a teacher or a parent, whatever it might be, that is part of leadership these days. I think that, I did not expect the New York City mayoral race to be the perfect embodiment of the work that I'd spent the last 2 years really writing and thinking about, but man, did it come at the right time.
And not without controversy. I mean, what you're now seeing are people coalesce around Eric Adams, who I think at one point was no longer considered politically viable in the city. And so you're seeing people coalesce in opposition to Mamdani. Give me another example of somebody who's older.
Somebody who's older, who's good or bad?
Who's good? Who's good? What's an example? What's the best example of sort of Gen X or baby boomer leadership who you think, okay, this is a person who's not in our age demographic, but they actually get it?
Elizabeth Warren, I think, is actually a pretty good example. Clear values, really understands what she's in it for, knows how to communicate it. Not always the best communicator for this particular media environment, but really knows what she believes and can hold her sense of self in spaces where it might get pushed upon. I think that is really the thing that sets, in particular, good leadership apart. It's you have to know who you are, what you stand for, and what boundaries you're willing to set in order to then allow people to push against them. Because if you don't, if your only goal is power, that's not a sense of self. That's an ego. And that doesn't allow for actual engagement or conversation. And in this moment, you need to be able to have conversation.
It strikes me that one of the issues in the Democratic Party is the size of the tent. Mm-hmm. When the tent is as big as is the Democratic Party's tent, it becomes necessary to compromise. I think that there is sort of a preference for a sort of centrism that is assumed to be able to bring people together. And I just sort of speaking very personally, or my personal views, I think that there is a need for a type of centrism in the country writ large, frankly. What's your advice to the party, the Democratic Party, magical fair. I'm not talking about the actual leadership. I'm talking like wave a magic wands. There's a lot of disaffection. I think that being the minority party in both houses, the country's now in the hands of a very activist government. What's your advice? What should people do now? I think people are dispirited. They are depressed. They are angry. They are frustrated. What should happen next?
I think there's a short-term answer, which is I think we need more good people to run for office in the immediate term, which is my most cliched answer, but also I think the truest answer, in that, especially at the local level, it's the only place we're going to get meaningful progress. It's also the most important places that can really tackle the issues that people are dealing with on a day-to-day life, like cost of housing, cost of childcare, cost of transportation, cost of living is predominantly an issue decided on the state and local level. So can we get more people into these offices who can do things on it and who can protect against the worst stuff that Trump is doing? That's the next 2 to 3 years. Long term, I think there's a bigger question about what story the Democratic Party needs to tell right now. Because I think the stories that we've been trying to tell for the last couple of years, restore the soul of America, regain the promise of the American dream, that is good and all, but for a lot of folks that rings really hollow, and it also doesn't speak to again, to what we were talking about earlier, these institutions, these American institutions didn't serve us. Now, I have lots of ideas on what that story could be, but I do think it needs to come authentic to the candidate who's telling it. I would be interested in hearing a candidate talk about how their goal is to end the loneliness crisis, to end isolation, and that there's a bunch of different ways we could do that through policy. Yes, like building more housing so you can live where you want to live and don't have to spend all the time in your car, tackling mental health care, tackling big tech and regulating technology in that way, 4-day work weeks, better unionization laws. There's lots of different ways in which you could think about using policy levers to tackle the isolation crisis or the loneliness crisis. I would also be interested in a story that talks about a candidate saying, I want to make you rich. I want to make you rich in money and rich in time. I want to give you the freedom to work less and get paid more. And I'm going to do that by making your healthcare cheaper, your childcare cheaper, making sure you can take off time to be with your family and not lose a paycheck. You could see the way in which these policies could ladder up into these larger visions. But I think especially for candidates who are trying to reach millennials and Gen Z, who are going to be the majority of the voting population and the majority of the workforce in years to come. Sorry to Gen X. You got to be able to answer the question, the most important question, which I think many people, 45-ish and younger are thinking right now, which is what's the fucking point? You got to answer that question, whether it's family, money, stability, freedom, flexibility. We have to be able to answer that, and we have to back it up with a vision for how we're going to give it to them.
If an older generation has any obligation to a younger generation, it is to create more opportunity or to create or to ensure that spaces are open to the creation of opportunity. Now, on the one hand, we've seen young people really take the reins and create jobs that didn't exist before, exploit new platforms and technologies that didn't exist before. But I don't think we've done a great job creating opportunity. We tell people you should go to school, get good grades, go to college. And then, folks do that. They come out with a mountain of debt and a degree that doesn't get them even the opportunity to pay for all of the debt that they endured. So what are the spaces? What are the ways in which you think that because, you're growing up too, we're all aging. How do we all do a better job of creating opportunity for the people who one day are going to show up and, be expected to do things, learn things, be things, but they're not quite sure what happens next? How do we do a better job creating those opportunities?
It's such a good question. I think about it in at least my work in the political space of when someone raises their hand to lead, right now the inclination is to say, not your turn. Get in the back of the line. Okay, but maybe take a seat and work a little harder first. And I think we have to be open to the idea that, you have asked me earlier about experience, actually the experience of fresh energy and wisdom and naivety can be a value add, because it means you're coming in not burnt by the cynicism or not jaded by the cynicism of nothing's going to work. So part of that is just being open to letting people skip the line or forget the idea of the line in the first place. I also think there are a lot of environments where seniority really plays a heavy hand. And think about Congress is one of them, but it's true in a lot of other workplaces and anything else. We got to be okay with sometimes it's just not fair, and we got to let new voices step up and be a little bit louder. It's really hard. Like I say all of this, and I know in my own life and in every leader I've ever spoken with, it's really, really hard to say, what, maybe I'm not the right person to do this anymore. But good leaders put the team and the goal ahead of themselves. We got to put that ahead of ourselves.
I threw out early on the example or examples of situations where, you do want experience, right? Where you do want a surgeon who's performed many surgeries. You do want a lawyer who's argued many cases. But in those disciplines, at some point, people are like, okay, I'm done now. I'm not going to try to be a surgeon forever. I don't think that I'm the best person necessarily to be arguing this case 50 years in. I am raising and generating new talent to take over for me. And it does seem like in politics, we don't get that. People just sort of assume I got the job. I'm going to keep the job for as long as I can. I'll die in this seat. It hasn't served the Democrats well. And that's something that you've really honed in on. You were president and co-founder of Run for Something. What about you? Do you ever plan to run for something?
Thank you for asking. You should always ask people to run for office, but I think you should run because there's a problem you want to solve, and the office will give you power to solve it. And what I do now is the problem I care about solving. So not anytime soon for sure, but thank you. And I will say you should also consider running for office.
I'm too old for you to help me though.
Doesn't mean you can do it. And you know what? We got lots of resources for you regardless.
You never know. You never know in what direction life may take you. So we'll see about all of that. Tell me what you want to be doing in 30 years. I'm intentionally, how old are you now? 33? 35. So I'm intentionally picking an age that's older than the age I am now. So tell me what do you want to be doing in 30 years?
Oh man, no one's asked me that in a hot minute. I have two little kids right now. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 10-month-old. So in 30 years, I hope that I am, wherever they are, able to support them as young adults and making sure that they have the lives that they want to, they can lead the lives they want to lead. I assume I'll still be working because there's no world in which I'm going to be retiring at 65. But I hope that work is meaningful and interesting and making the world a better place and not taking up space from someone who could do it better. I hope that I'm serving my goals and not my ego. And I hope that my husband and I, may we have the privilege of aging the next 30 years and living the next 30 years, have some time to enjoy it. Because I think that would be nice. I also I hope we're not fighting in the water wars, Yeah,
really. Amanda Litman, your organization, of which you are president and co-founder, is Run for Something. The current book is When We're in Charge, The Next Generation's Guide to Leadership. You, my friend, you are a wonder. Thank you for everything that you're doing and for lifting up voices that need to be heard.
Thank you for having me.